Hello there. Let us continue solving questions on iteration statements. And we have already started solving questions in the nested loop patterns category, in which the first subcategory that we took up was the box subcategory, where we had solved these 14 questions in the last two videos. So with this done, let's move on to the next subcategory, which is the right angle triangle left aligned subcategory, where we will solve these questions. So let's get started with the first question from the list, which is this. So we want to print this given the value of n is 5. So to determine how to print this, that is what code will be right to print this, let us follow a similar approach that we did when we solved questions in the box subcategory, which is to draw a grid around this. So if I draw a grid around it, and if I number the rows and the columns starting from 0, this is what we will get, right? So what does this tell us? This tells us that if n is equal to 5, we need 5 rows starting from 0 all the way up to row number 4, right? And if n is equal to 5, we will need a maximum of 5 columns. I'm saying a maximum of 5 columns because, as you can see, for row number 0, we have only one column. For row number 1, we have got two columns. For row number 2, we have got three columns, and so on, right? So given that we need 5 rows, what we can do is we can iterate 5 times, right? Each iteration will take care of one row, and that we can do with the help of the variable I. So what we can do is this. We can say for I is equal to 0, I less than n, I plus plus. So what's going to happen here is I will iterate from 0 all the way up to n, which means if n is 5, I will iterate from 0 all the way up to 4. So this takes care of iterating for each row. Now comes the question as to how can we ensure that we iterate for the required number of columns. Because given n is equal to 5, we won't need 5 columns for each row, right? So for that, let's try to find a pattern over here. So when I is 0, that is when we are on the first row, how many columns do we need? We need one column. Then when I is 1, that is we are in the second row, we need two columns. For the third row, we need three columns. Fourth row, we need four columns. And for the fifth row, we need five columns, right? So if you compare the value of I that we have over here and the number of columns that we need, what do you observe? Can we say that the number of columns that we will need is I plus 1? We can, right? Because if I is 0, we need one column. If I is 1, we need two columns, and this applies to all of the other values of row and the number of columns that we need, right? So what we will have to take care of now is, given we are in any row, say I, we will have to ensure that we iterate for I plus 1 times to get the required number of columns, right? Which means we need another loop, of course, inside the loop with the control variable I. And here we can say the control variable is j. Now we will start j from 0 because irrespective of the number of columns that we have in each row, the first column will always start from 0, right? So we can start j from 0. That is absolutely correct. Now the next question is, where do we stop? So if I is 0, we need only one column, which means the column number or the maximum column number will be 0, right? When I is 1, the maximum column number will be 1 because 0 will give us the first column and 1 will give us the second column. The same thing holds for I being 2 and B needing 3 columns, which means we will go to column number 2 at max. And the same thing applies to I being 3 and I being 4 as well, right? So can we say that if we start from 0, we can stop at the current value of I to get the required number of columns? We can, right? So if I is 0, we start from 0 and stop at 0. We get one column, which is what we need. So This will be taken care of. Then when I is 1, we start from 0 and go all the way up to 1. So that will give us these two columns. Then when I is 2, we start from 0, go up to 2. When I is 3, we start from 0 and go up to 3. And when I is 4, we start from 0 and go all the way up to 4, right? So can the condition of the inner loop be this? J starts from 0, and like we have discussed, we need to go all the way up to I, right? So all the way up to I means starting from 0 and going up to I, which means including I. So we can say J is equal to 0, J less than equal to I, J plus plus, right? So if we take this nested loop into consideration, what values of I and J will we have? Let's first of all check that and then decide how to print these asterisks, right? So if I say I is 0, what will J be? J will go from 0 all the way up to I, including I. So it will go from 0 to 0. Then when I is 1, it will go from 0 to 1. When I is 2, it will go from 0 to 2. I is 3, it will go from 0 all the way up to 3. And when I is 4, it will go from 0 all the way up to 4. So the coordinates that we will have is this. We will have 0, 0, right? Which is this one. Then we will have 1, 0 and 1, 1. So it will be 1, 0 and 1, 1. Then similarly, if we take I2, we will have 2, 0, 2, 1 and 2, 2, right? So we will get these. And similarly, we can check for 3 and 4 as well. So this loop seems to be working perfectly fine, right? When I say perfectly fine, it seems to be working perfectly fine for giving us the number of rows that we will need and the number of columns that we will need in each row, right? Now, the only thing that is left is printing an asterisk followed by a space. And that we know can be done with the help of a system.out.print. We'll print an asterisk, leave a space, and what are we going to do next is we're going to close the inner loop and we're going to put an empty println statement after the inner loop, right? That will take care of moving the cursor to the next line after printing the last asterisk in the previous row. So with this code, we will be able to print this pattern. So with this clear, let us go to IntelliJ, and over here we have a package called iteration statements. Inside this we have package called questions, then nested loop, and then we also have a box package inside nested loop. So what am I going to do is I'm going to create a new package first of all inside the nested loop patterns package, and I'm going to name this as right angled triangle left aligned. And inside this, I'll create a new Java class. I'll call this class as Q1. Then what am I going to do is I'm going to have a main method, then create a variable called n, initialize this to 5, and then I'll write the code, which is this. For int I is equal to 0, I less than n, I plus plus. Then for int j is equal to 0, j less than equal to I, j plus plus. And here I'll have a system.out.print where I'll print an asterisk and a space. And then after the inner for loop ends, we'll have an empty println statement. So if I run the code, what do we get? Well, we get this printed, which is exactly what we expected, right? Now, if I change the value of n from 5 to, let's say, 7, we should get 7 rows. And that is what we are getting. So this code seems to be working perfectly fine, which means that we have solved the first question. So with this, let's move on to the second question, which is this. So this is what we are trying to print given the value of n is 5, right? Now we already know how to iterate such that we are able to get these coordinates, right? The only thing that is left to decide is how do we decide what to print for each of these cells, right? So if we take I, which is going from 0 to 4, and j, which is going from 0 all the way up to 4, you would notice that the value that we are printing depends in a way on the value of I. So when the value of I is 0, we are printing 1. When the value of I is 1, we are printing 2. When the value of I is, let's say, 3, we are printing 4, right? None of these values depends on the value of j, because as you can see, when value of I is 3, we are printing 4 when the value of j is 0. We are printing 4 when the value of j is 1, and we are printing 4 when the values of j were 2 and 3, right? So we can conclude that what we are printing depends on the value of I, right? Now the next question is, what is the relation between what we are printing and the current value of I? And that is I plus 1, right? Because if I is 0, we are printing 1. If I is 1, we are printing 2. If I is 3, we are printing 4. If I is 4, we are printing 5. And of course, if I is 2, we are printing 3. So since we know how to iterate such that we get all of these cells, the only thing that we have to do is we have to print I plus 1 instead of printing an asterisk, right? So with this understood, what we can do is come back to IntelliJ, create a new class, call it Q2, then copy the main method and paste it here. So the only change we will need is this. Instead of printing asterisk and a space, what are we going to print is I plus 1, right? So with this, if I run the code, what do we get? We get 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 3, and so on. Now, let's also add a space after printing the value of I plus 1 so that this looks a little better. And this is what we got. And this is exactly what we were trying to achieve, right? So we can say that we have solved the second question. So let's move on to the third question, which is this. So this is what we are going to print, right? Given the value of n is 5. In the earlier question, we were printing 1 in the first row, 2 in the second row, 3 in the third row, and so on. Now, instead of printing 1, 2, 3, and so on, we are printing the first letter of the alphabet in the first row, second letter of the alphabet in the second row, third letter of the alphabet in the third row, and so on, right? Now, from the last question, what we got to know was if we can relate the value of I with what we are printing, we will be able to print it easily, right? Because in any iteration, we will have the value of I. So if there's a relation between the value of I and what we are printing, it will be easy to print. Here we have got A, which is the first letter of the English alphabet, right? So can we say that when I is 0, we are printing A? We can. Can we say that when I is 1, we are printing A, which is the first letter, plus 1, which means we are taking the first letter of the English alphabet, increasing it in a way to get the second letter of the English alphabet, and we are printing that, right? Similarly, for I is equal to 2, can we say we're printing the letter that is two letters after the first letter? We can, right? And the same thing holds for rest of the rows that we have, right? So given any row, what we are printing is we are printing A plus the row number that we are on, right? So with this clear, let us go to IntelliJ and let us write the code for this. And for that, what am I going to do is I'm going to create a new class, call it Q3, copy the main method from Q2, paste it here, and instead of printing I plus 1, what are we going to do is we're going to print I plus A. Now, let me run the code and let me show you the output at this point. What exactly would happen is, since I is an integer and A is char, it will get converted to integer, as in the sum would become 65 plus the current value of I. And that is what is happening, right? But the good news is it is pretty simple to convert an integer to the character that it represents in the ASCII representation, right? And that can be done by typecasting it to char. So if I do that, what do we get? We get A, B, B, C, 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 and so on, right? Which is exactly what we wanted. So with this, we're done with the third question. Now let's move on to the fourth question over here. All right, so let us try to find a relation between the values of I and j and what we are supposed to print, right? So over here, if you take a look, what are we doing in the first row is we're printing just 1. That is the first natural number, right? In the second row, we're printing 1 and 2. That is the first two natural numbers. Same thing holds for row number 2, 3, and 4, right? So here, you would notice that what we are printing is not really dependent on the value of I, correct? Because when the value of I is 0, we're printing 1. When the value of I is 1, we are printing 1 and 2. When the value of I is 2, we are printing 1, 2, and 3, right? But you would also notice that what we are printing is dependent on the value of j. Because if the value of j is 0, we are printing 1, right? When the value of j is 1, we are printing 2. When the value of j is 2, we are printing 3. When the value of j is 3, we are printing 4. And when the value of j is 4, we are printing 5. So can we say that what we are printing in each of the iteration is just j plus 1? We can, right? So with this one change done, we will be able to print this pattern. So with this understood, let us come back to IntelliJ and let's have a new Java class called Q4. And let us copy the main method from Q3. Let's paste it over here. And what are we going to do is get rid of all of this. And we're going to print j plus 1 with a space. So if I run the code now, what do we have? We have 1, then 1, 2, then 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on, right? So with this, we have solved this question. So let's move on to the next question, which is this. So this is what we have to print, right? Now, similar to the last question, you would observe that what we are printing depends on the value of j. So when j is 0, we're printing A. When j is 1, we're printing B, and so on, right? So here, can we say that when j is 0, we are printing A plus 0? We can, right? When j is 1, we are printing A plus 1. And the same thing holds for j being 2, where we are printing A plus 2, and so on, right? So if we take the code that we had just written, which is this, and we modify this such that we print j plus A, we will be able to solve this question, right? So for that, let's quickly create a new Java class. Let's call it Q5. Here, we will copy the main method from Q4 and we will paste it over here. And what are we going to do is we're going to change 1 to A. And we know that we will have to typecast it, right? So if I run the code now, what do we get? We get this A, AB, ABC, ABCD, and so on. So we have solved this question also. Now let us move on to the next question, which is this. So take a look at this pattern. Here, what are we doing is in the first row, we're printing 5. In the second row, we're printing 4 2 times. In the third row, we're printing 3 3 times. And in the fourth row, printing 2 4 times. In the fifth row, printing 1 5 times, right? So if you take a look, you would notice that the value that we are printing in any given row is the same, right? Which means the value that we are printing is not really dependent on the column number that we are on. It is dependent on the row number that we are on, correct? So when I is 0, what we are printing is 5. When I is 1, we are printing 4. I is 2, we are printing 3. I is 3, we are printing 2. And I is 4, we are printing 1, right? So if we figure out a relation between these, we will be able to determine what to print in any iteration, right? So if we take a look, when I is 0, we are printing 5, right? 0 plus 5 is 5. Then when I is 1, we are printing 4. Again, 1 plus 4 is 5. And this holds for all of the combination of I and what we are printing here, right? So When we add the value of I and what we are supposed to print, it gives us 5. Now, where is this 5 coming from? This 5 is the value of n, right? So we can say that when I is 0, we are printing n. When I is 1, we are printing 4, which is just n minus 1. And the same thing holds for all of the other values of I. So what are we doing is, we are printing n minus 2 when I is 1, sorry, when I is 2, n minus 3 when I is 3, and n minus 4 when I is 4. So essentially, if you take a look, we are printing n minus I, correct? So if we take this relation, that is n minus I, and we print this, will we be able to get this pattern? We will be, right? So what are we going to do is go to IntelliJ, create a new Java class. Let's call it Q6. And what are we going to do here is have a main method. And let's copy the loop from the solution of the previous question, paste it here. And all that we will have to do is change what we print inside the inner for loop, right? So over here, like we discussed, what are we going to print is, we're going to print n minus I. So we'll say n minus I, and we will give a space. So if I run the code now, what do we get? We get 7, 6, 6, 5, 5, 5, 4, 4, 4, 4, and so on, right? Which is exactly what we expected. I mean, since we took the value of n as 7, we got this. But if I change the value of n to 5, this is what we will get. And that is what we expected to get, right? So with this done, let's move on to the next question, which is this. Now take a look at what are we supposed to print. We're supposed to print E in the first row. We're supposed to print 2D in the second row, 3C in the third row, 4B in the fourth row, and 5A in the fifth row, right? And here as well, what are we printing does not depend on the column number that we are on. We're printing the exact same thing, right? So we can say that this depends on the row number that we are on, right? So when we are on row number 0, we are printing E. Row number 1, we are printing D. 2, C, 3, B, and 4 is A, right? So can we say, but before that, let me write it here so that I have enough space. So can we say that when I is 4, what we are doing is, we are printing A plus 0, right? Then when I is 3, we are printing A plus 1. When I is 2, we are printing A plus 2. When I is 1, we are printing A plus 3. And finally, when I is 0, we are printing A plus 4. We can say that, right? So this part is common. That is, we are printing A plus something. Now that something is what we need to decide. So if we take a look, when I is 0, we are printing 4. When I is 1, we are printing 3. As in not really printing 4 and printing 3, we are printing A plus 4 and A plus 3 respectively, right? So when I is 2, we are printing A plus 2. When I is 3, we are printing A plus 1. And when I is 4, we are printing A plus 0. So this reduces to this. When I is 0, we are printing A plus 4. I is 1, A plus 3. I is 2, A plus 2. I is 3, A plus 1. And I is 4, A plus 0. So if you take a look, you would observe that when you add I, that is the value of I, and this, you would get 4, right? So 0 plus 4 is 4, 1 plus 3 is 4. Same thing holds for all of these, right? So can we say that what we are printing over here is this, right? What are we doing is, when I is 0, we're printing A plus 4 minus I, right? And now, where is this 4 coming from? This 4 is coming from the value of n, which is 5. Because if the value of n was 6, for example, we would have got 5 minus I as the relation. You can try that out. I'm not doing it in the interest of time, but I would highly recommend that you try it out. So we're getting 4 minus I over here, and this 4 can be related to the value of n that we have. So we can say that this is n minus 1 minus I, right? So if this is n minus 1 minus I, what will this become? Can we say that Okay, where do I write this? Can we say that this ultimately is a plus n minus 1 minus I? We can, right? Because as you can see, we have got a in all of these. Then we had 4, 3, 2, 1, and 0. And we found out that that relation would be n minus 1 minus I. And we have got n, we have got I as well. So if you use this, we will be able to print this pattern, right? So keep this relation in mind, or maybe write it down somewhere. And with that, let's go back to IntelliJ, create a new Java class. Let's call it Q7. And let's have a main method over here. Now, what are we going to do? Well, let's copy the contents of main method from the solution of last question. Let's paste it here. And what we will have to change here is, instead of printing n minus I, what we will have to do is we'll have to print a plus n minus 1 minus I, right? And since we want to print the characters, we'll need to typecast this to char. So with this, if I run the code, this is what we have. E in the first row, 2D in the second, 3C in the third, 4B in the fourth, and 5A in the fifth, which is exactly what we expected, right? So with this clear, we have done 7 questions out of, I guess, the 13 questions that I had shortlisted for this particular subcategory. Yes. So we're done with 7 questions. Now, I had intended to solve all of the 13 questions in one single video, but like I can see, if we do that, the length of the video will be very long. So what am I going to do is I'm going to stop here and take up the next 6 questions in the next video. So I hope you have learned something new and useful. And if you have any suggestions, feedback, or queries, feel free to put them in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.